I see you shiver with anticipation.
Patient. You want to say patient. Anticipation. I can't wait. Anticipation. Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast, where psychology meets film. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today's episode is a fun one. We are going to do the time warp again. Yes, that's right. We are talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Rocky Horror Picture Show, comedy musical, the cult classic, the one that came out in 1975, directed and written by Jim Sharman. I hope I'm saying that right. Based on the original musical by Richard O'Brien, and it stars very good actors. We have Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter in one of his best roles. I will swear by that. One of his best roles. Susan Sarandon in one of her earlier roles. And Barry Bostwick, the mayor from I believe it was Mayor from the Michael J. Fox show. Why can't I think of the name of the show? But anyways, Barry Bostwick, Brad Majors, and then Richard O'Brien, who wrote the musical play, plays Riff Raff. So and because he wrote the music, Meatloaf also makes an appearance. Charles Gray in a fantastic role outside of his normal roles, kind of a goofy role as the criminologist. Anyways, we are going to be talking about this. Now, the other interesting thing about this episode that you are about to listen to is it was recorded as a streaming episode. So we did this live on my Twitch channel, CogPsychProf. We did this live. So if you're listening to this episode when it goes live or within 60 days of that recording, you can go watch the whole thing and our breaks and everything like that on my Twitch channel. After that, it'll disappear because the point was to make the podcast episode and not a video to keep. So that's why it'll sound a little different. It'll have a slightly different pace to it. There will be a couple of breaks where we will put in my call to action mid-roll and the sharing segment that I also plan to include in this episode from listeners like you. So stay tuned for this episode. It is a good one. We have a returning guest. So let's get right into it. All right. My guest host today is friend of the show, Dr. Wynn Goodfriend. She's a professor of psychology at Buena Vista University in Iowa, and this is her fourth appearance on the show. 4 times.
Yay.
Wind, how are things going in the age of the COVID pandemic? It's been almost a year since we last talked.
Yes, it has been a long year, although I feel like it hasn't been that long since I got to talk to you. First, let me say thank you for having me back. It's my honor and pleasure.
Of course.
Other than I feel like it hasn't been a year since I've talked to you. In every other way, it's been a very long year. But the good news is my partner and I both got our first vaccine shot last Saturday. So we are optimistic.
Awesome.
Things are going to get better soon.
Yeah. I will be getting, my wife and I will be getting our first doses tomorrow.
Great.
So that is looking, we're planning on having a low-key weekend.
Yes.
Fingers crossed that we don't have issues, but yeah, I that's awesome. That's awesome. And I'm happy to have you back. It's always fun talking movies with you. And I understand that you are teaching a psych and film course this semester, and every week, I believe, you've been sharing the films that you're discussing each week on Facebook, as we are Facebook friends.
Yes.
And so how is that class going?
You know, it's one of my absolute favorite classes to teach. I developed it for the first time about 8 years ago. It meets once a week. There's a 40-minute lecture on the topic of the week, and then they watch the movie, and they have to write a paper every week saying what was accurate, what was inaccurate. If there were psychologists in the film, how were they portrayed? Is this doing good in the general audience in terms of understanding psychological topics? So I love the class because I love movies and I love psychology.
Right.
The funniest thing that is relevant to when I first developed this class was I would tell people about it because I was excited. And the by far most common question I got was, are there enough movies to have a whole class on psychology of film? And of course, my response was, every movie is psychology. So yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Every movie. Yeah. So it's been great. And it's my most popular class by far.
Most popular class as far as how many people are in it, or just what you're expecting with student evaluations, that sort of thing?
Probably both. But definitely in terms of enrollment.
This is not the first time you've taught this class, right?
I think this is the fourth time I've been able to teach it. I teach it every other year.
Every other year? Oh, wow. I didn't realize you were doing it that often.
Yep.
The most I could probably get away with would be as a summer class. And I'm weighing whether or not I want to do it this summer with all of the other responsibilities that I have to do this summer, like writing scripts and such. So
right.
I don't know if I have the energy to do that. But I would like to.
Well, the best part about the psych and film class is that 2 of the 3 hours are the movie. So
that's very true. And that's exactly what I did. Right. It is. I mean, you can almost do it on autopilot at this point.
Don't tell my dean
as far as yes. Don't tell my provost. The interesting thing, and you mentioned, like, are there enough films to do that? First of all, it's at most like a 16-week class. It's like, yeah, I can figure out 16 films if we did a film for 16 every 16 weeks. But I mean, there is a database that exists just for cognitive science films at Indiana University. Like, of course, I can find 16 or 15 or 12 or whatever, however many you're gonna do. Like, that's such a silly. That's an out of the loop kind of question. It's like, oh, bless your heart.
Right. I think they're very limited in thinking only mental illnesses, and of course that's not even my primary area of psychology.
And it's funny too, because we could totally find 16 films for that as well.
Of course.
Because, like, if we were to quantify, like, the psychological concepts in all the movies, as you said, every movie is a psychology movie.
Right.
It would definitely, psych disorders would far outnumber any other kinds of psych concepts in the films, right?
Yeah.
So even that kind of myopic thinking is oh, bless your heart kind of response from me, of course.
Right.
But we are talking about one of your films this episode here. We are discussing So I saw your posts, and I think this was maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the semester or something like that.
Yes.
I saw you post Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I've been thinking about that movie for a while. It's been a while since I saw it. I watched it again today for our conversation. It's been a while since I saw it, but I have been thinking about it specifically for the things that we are going to talk about today. And when I saw you say that, I was like, okay, I gotta sort of jumble up this schedule here for upcoming episodes because I need to talk to Wind about this. I really do. Let's just jump right in to our discussion of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. As I mentioned at the start of the episode, this film has a really, really fantastic performance by Tim Curry.
Absolutely.
And it's a bit of a bummer because I was looking him up recently, and he suffered a stroke in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's a real big bummer because of, his filmography is amazing. Mm-hmm. And he can't really act anymore because of this stroke. He's basically, as many stroke survivors do, they lose a number of speech abilities. Tim Curry had that issue, and it was a bummer when I read about that and talking about this movie. So Tim Curry's in it. Brian Boswick, an early role for Susan Sarandon, and what are the big things that we want to take away from this movie?
Well, let me tell you, I'm happy to have this opportunity to chat with you about the film because my students did not have the reaction I really expected when I showed them this film. And in hindsight, it makes sense, but this was the 4th film we watched. The 3rd film was Memento, and they were confused by that. And I said,
not surprising.
And I said, just wait. So then we watched Rocky Horror the next week, and I am not making this up. I had 2 students email me and say, Dr. Goodfriend, I might have to drop this class because I'm a Christian and I'm not sure I can't keep watching movies like this. And I wasn't really expecting quite that strong of a response.
That's an interesting response.
But it shows the reaction that people have when they watch this movie. I think that there's a very divided reaction. Some people, when they watch this movie, it feeds their soul. It's something that, as I think we'll talk about tonight, something that provides them this sense of relief and hope and a way for them to reach out to people in their own community. And there have been a lot of articles about how this movie has actually sometimes even saved people's lives because they felt like I can go to the live showings and I can participate and I can find people who will accept me for who I am. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who really hate this movie, which was most of my students. And so they had some really interesting criticisms of the film. And some of those I can see. So I'd like to kind of talk about sort of both sides of this film and really kind of critically think about, has it held up since it came out in 75? It came out in 1975 as a film. It was originally a live play in London.
Right.
Came out as a film in 75. And it holds the record for the longest film being released in theaters, right? I mean, it's still being shown despite COVID, actually.
Right.
So
exactly.
It holds the record for sort of the most recurring film in all of history, but it's quite controversial still.
Yeah. So what are the major themes, considering that you got emails from students about them specifically mentioning their Christianity? Right. What are the specific themes that might have led to this reaction from your students?
Well, so my students are aware that when they take classes with me, they know that I am not shy about the fact that I identify as pansexual. and that my classes will have a progressive message. So I don't think that was a big surprise. But
that's refreshing.
This movie was kind of maybe pushing them a little bit. So the theme that I give them before they watch the movie this week was gender and sexuality, and those concepts being fluid and on a spectrum as opposed to categorical variables. So if you think about sexual orientation, sex, and gender as male, female, homosexual, heterosexual, and that's it, and pick one, and there's one that you should pick, that's maybe not the only way to look at the world. And so I talked about whether gender and sex and sexual orientation are malleable and continuous. And so I introduced the Kinsey Model, which is a single continuum with heterosexual on one pole and homosexual on the other pole. And that's a fairly well-known model in psychology. A lesser known...
Yeah, it's been around since what, 1950?
Yeah, late 50s, something. I have the book on my desk here, but that's a...
They made a movie about that.
Absolutely. Like, that's a great movie.
That's going to be on the podcast eventually.
Great movie. Liam Neeson is really good in that.
Yes, agree.
So people in psychology are kind of familiar with that continuum, maybe not so much outside of psychology. So for some of my students, I was introducing them to the Kinsey model, but I also introduced them to the Storms model, which I prefer to Kinsey. So Storms has two continua. One continuum is attraction to the same sex. One is attraction to what we might call the opposite sex, although I don't actually agree with it being opposite.
Sure, yeah.
But that means it's more like a traditional graph where you have an x-axis and a y-axis. And that means you could fall anywhere in the graph. So if you have high levels of both variables, that puts you in what used to be called bisexual, what is now pansexual or omnisexual. And then you can also have low levels of both, which leads you to the label of asexual, right? But it just offers more options, more flexibility, and of course the idea that you can move around in that graph.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we kind of talked about...
like a Cartesian plane. It's two-dimensional. Right. Who are you attracted to? When are you attracted to? All of these kinds of variables can change. Yeah, I like that model as well. I don't know if I would call them models, but the two, I will do air quotes around models here because they are not scientific, but the two that I show my students, because I don't have any classes where I spend a lot of time on this idea itself, but the two that I use are either the genderbread person, which is now I think in version 4, which has adopted a lot of features of Storm,
right?
And then the gender unicorn, which also has features of Storm, where pretty much all the aspects that are discussed, gender identity, gender is identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, and it's cuts out attraction to romantically attracted to, and I guess we'll call it, because I can't think of the word right now, cognitively attracted to. So there are two, like you're sexually attracted to people, or you are just like, I like that person because they're a person,
right?
Kind of attraction. So the two separate attractions, and both exist on all of them exist on continua. Yeah, and so those are ones that I show, and it's astonishing to me how few of my students, who are of course younger than us, don't actually know either of those models, even in the internet sense of the word model.
So that leads me to an interesting question about the role of this movie in terms of generations, right? So when it came out in the 70s, the LGBTQIA plus population didn't have a lot of movies like this, right? So it was really pushing the boundaries. It was not really intended for a general audience. It was intended to appeal to this very specific audience. And many disenfranchised people were drawn to this film because it was intentionally for them. It was doing lots of things like breaking the fourth wall, where Tim Curry turns to the camera and looks directly into it. And some people argue that this is the first movie that did that. Now, I'm not sure if that's 100%.
I don't know if that's accurate,
but some people have claimed that. At least he does that. Okay, so
he does, and they're also the criminologist is talking directly to us.
Right.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey. It seemed a fairly ordinary night when Brad Majors and his fiancée, Janet Weiss, two young, ordinary, healthy kids, left Denton that late November evening to visit a Dr. Everett Scott, ex-tutor and now friend to both of them. It's true, there were dark storm clouds, heavy, black, and pendulous, toward which they were driving. It's true also that the spare tire they were carrying was badly in need of some air. But they, being normal kids and on a night out, well, they were not going to let a storm spoil the events of their evening. On a night out. It was a night out they were going to remember for a very long.
So it does things like that, where in the 70s, it was really important, and it's still important to a lot of people today. But my students, when Tim Curry calls himself a transvestite, there are sort of audible gasps, like, that's not a word that you can say anymore. You know?
Right. And that they're from the planet transsexual.
Right. So when they wrote their papers, one of the big criticisms that my students had of this generation, and they're all pretty much sort of, 18, 19, 20 years old, they said, it's not okay that the trans people in this film were made to be aliens, because that's dehumanizing trans people. And I thought that this movie was going to be holding up trans people and, saying that they were good. And the fact that Frank is a villain for most of the movie was something that they did not appreciate. Now, he's kind of switched at the end. There's sort of like a plot twist where he's actually the guy you're supposed to sort of empathize with and root for.
Right.
But that kind of got lost on them, or at least for some of them. And many of my female students did not appreciate that he kind of sexually assaults Janet and Brad. So
both of them. Yeah.
He disguises himself as someone else. He does things without their consent. Now, they eventually consent, but they said not only is that sort of glorifying sexual assault, but it's also associating the LGBTQIA population with sexual assault and with hedonism in general, that like all people in that community are sexual predators, basically, that they're like recruiting, right? Which is a horrible stereotype of people in the community.
There are those who say that life is an illusion and that reality is simply a figment of the imagination. If this is so, then Brad and Janet are quite safe. However, the sudden departure of their host and his creation into the seclusion of his somber bridal suite had left them feeling both apprehensive and uneasy. A feeling which grew as the other guests departed, and they were shown to their separate rooms.
And so the vast majority of my students said, this movie is reinforcing all these really negative stereotypes, and it's horrible. And I had kind of had those responses myself, but it wasn't really articulated in the same way for me, because I grew up with this being a cult classic loved by the LGBTQIA community.
Right.
And so
that's all I've heard
Right.
from that community too. Like I have a really good friend, and he was on the show recently. We did the X-Men, Michael Alexander. He does I can't remember exactly when he did this, but he recently went to an RHPS show wearing a Frankenfurter costume.
Right.
Yeah, the girder and everything.
Yeah,
and
the
corset
fishnets and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school and college, a lot of people were going to this live show, and it was a celebration of being yourself and being authentic and not being shamed, not being made to feel guilty, a celebration of, being non-binary, being genderqueer. And so that's how I interpreted the film and why I wanted to show it to my students. So I don't know if it's because many of my students are from rural Midwestern areas. I don't know if it's because my university has a Christian affiliation. Not every student who goes here is Christian, but it is explicitly an affiliation of the university. I don't know if it's just this generation. I mean, when I talk to my students in a class, like I teach a class on psychology of gender, and I talk to them about cisgender versus transgender, and they're like, who cares? Like, they grew up in a culture, in a generation where it's not a big deal. And
and I hope that continues.
Yeah, it's a fantastic change. But I don't know that this movie is going to hold up for a generation that was raised with more acceptance.
I mean, yes, I would say more acceptance. But we also want to make sure that we are celebrating differences. And so even if they are like nonchalant about cis versus trans and all of that stuff, we still need to celebrate those differences. And I think that, and this is my personal opinion, I think this movie does celebrate. And because I watched it today, I was specifically looking for those things after looking at our notes and seeing what you had gotten from your class. I was specifically looking for these things. And yeah, I get the villainization of Frankenfurter. But I think the last, maybe it's not the last, maybe it's I guess it's the penultimate musical number, because I think the last musical number is Frankenfurter pleading for his life or something like that. But I think the penultimate one, where they are de-Medusa'd and they're all wearing the same thing as Frankenfurter, and and I had the subtitles on, if you read those lyrics, they are all saying, this is actually really good, this is really nice, this feels right.
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean, if you take Brad's character, for example, like, he was totally against it, right from the start. And even when he is quote unquote sexually assaulted by Frankenfurter, he says, okay, yeah, you can, right, you can go down on me, that's fine.
So the flip side in favor of this film is the idea that if everyone were really honest with themselves, maybe everyone would be at least a little bit pansexual, right? And the idea that you should not be ashamed of that you should embrace that and celebrate it. And that song at the end, "Don't Dream It, Be It." That's an inspiring song, right? That's kind of the take-home message that I always came off of this film with, like, be yourself, be authentic, be proud of who you are. Don't let society tell you who you have to be. That's the message that I wanted my students to get out of it. But I don't know. I mean, I just read an article today where it was basically, does Rocky Horror hold up? And some of the live participation traditions are being sort of frowned upon now. So an example of that is, it used to be that whenever Susan Sarandon would appear on the stage, the audience would yell "slut" at her. That's not cool today. you know, that's shaming. that's shaming a woman who's simply trying to enjoy sexuality. It doesn't hold up in today's culture. So it's interesting to see it from the next generation's view.
Yeah.
And to start, maybe I'm not, I don't know, maybe it got ruined for me, which makes me really sad.
I think another viewing is in order.
I need to go to it live. I think that's what I need to do.
Yeah, when it's back live again, for
after
sure.
COVID.
Or at least go to when they do it when they're back, theaters are back at it, go to another midnight screening.
Yeah.
Because that will keep happening.
Right.
I don't know if technically the pandemic has destroyed its record. But we'll see. That midnight viewings will be back. I think it's okay. So here's what I'll say. Here I'll drop my thoughts about just the film in general from a filmmaking standpoint. The film is a mess. It's a real mess.
Yeah.
It has some semblance of a plot, but not really. It's basically musical numbers meshed together.
Sure.
And you don't actually really know what Rocky Horror Picture Show means until Rocky in the credits is named Rocky Horror, because he's only named Rocky. He only gets the name Rocky within the movie in the dialogue. He's never called Rocky Horror during the film. And so it's just like, what is going on? What is happening? You get a sense of what is happening with Brad and Janet.
Sure.
And
it's a sexual awakening for Brad and Janet.
Yeah, it's a sexual awakening for both of them.
Absolutely.
And you get that. So they have character development, but nobody else really does in the movie. Nobody else really does. Maybe Rocky, but that's,
well, I think
I don't know.
How the
His
audience
character's strange.
sees Frank develops, right?
Even there, I think his character development is extremely thin, and he does change from. I would never have called him a villain, by the way. I think he's a tragic figure. He's a misunderstood person. We don't have the full backstory about Eddie or what Columbia has in this whole thing. It seems like she's a fan of Eddie, but she was also a fan of Frank.
Right.
But there's not enough regular dialogue to get you to these points.
But he does kidnap them. He does kill.
I still don't think
someone.
And
his parallel, of course, is Frankenstein, right? Which is the actual villain.
Dr. Frankenstein.
Right. The scientist, not Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
So the parallel is that in the book Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein is the bad guy. The monster is the good guy.
I still don't think Frankenfurter is a villain or a bad guy.
I don't think he is, but he's portrayed that way through most of the film. And my students did not like that. They basically said, you're perpetuating the stereotype that people in the LGBTQ community are recruiting and sexually obsessed and hedonists, and that they're selfish, right? And I started to kind of see their point.
But let's take the kernel of truth in that stereotype. Where did that kernel of truth originate? And is it really a kernel of truth? Is it really a stereotype?
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
That LGBT individuals are
hedonists,
villainized. Hedonists are recruiting and all of that.
They're villainized, yes, but they're certainly not sexual hedonists who recruit people.
Right. That's my point.
I'm in this community.
That's my point. My point is that your students were expressing this to you, and it gave you pause. But I wouldn't consider those stereotypes. I would consider that propaganda.
Yeah, but it's the same kind of issue that I have with TV shows like Will and Grace, where Jack. Okay, he's hilarious. I'm going to give the writers that. It's a funny show. But he's also perpetuating all of these super negative stereotypes about gay men, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is that really progress? why can't we just have a gay character who's like, I need to buy floor wax, like just a regular person?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's kind of what oh my gosh, his name is gonna escape me right now. Oh no. David Rose's husband in Schitt's Creek.
Oh, Eugene Levy?
No, that's his dad. No, his husband, the guy, the character he marries is your I need to buy some paint.
Yeah.
man.
Sorry, he was just on SNL. Levy, I can't.
Yeah. Dan Levy was just on SNL,
Yeah.
but no. So his character David Rose has a husband, and I am being a bad Schitt's Creek fan right now because the name is escaping me, and this is bad. This is bad. So yeah, but I go back to okay. So yeah, stereotypes and all of that, but I honestly think that what your students brought up in reference to stereotypes is more aligned with propaganda. And
I agree with you, but they're saying this is negative propaganda. They're saying the movie is the negative propaganda.
I would not say the movie is negative propaganda. No,
I never thought about it in that way until 2 weeks ago when my students all told me it was.
I think that's the lens. I think that's the lens that they are viewing it through. To be fair,
Dan Levy.
Yeah, Dan Levy was the David Rose character. Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, no, but so
Yeah.
my point is, I think you and I, maybe because we're older than my students, we don't think of it in that way. But my point
Right.
is that if some 18-year-old sees this on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever streaming thing they have, and they're like, oh, I've heard of that movie, I'm going to watch it. And they see it and they think, wow, this is so mean to the LGBTQIA population. Like, they don't have the historical context that we do. So I think from their lens, it's actually really bad. And that's why I'm saying, like, most of the people who watch this are not in a class where we're going to be talking.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know how you bridge that, to be honest, because I have not met any. So I like the movie, but I like the movie for the same kind of reasons that I like Clue.
Also,
or
with Tim
that
Curry.
I like. Yeah. Well, I mean, it helps. But for the same reason that I like The Room, like I like to hate to like The Room, but I like The Room. It's got some great quotables in it, but I mean it's a cult classic for a reason.
Yes. So this,
Right?
to me, is the ultimate cult classic film, right? It's got this underground following. It's got a specific audience. It ended up making way more money than it originally did when it came out. Like, this movie, to me, is the definition, almost like the epitome of a cult classic. But that means, I think for most cult classics, if you come into it not knowing what you're about to experience, not having that historical context, I think most general people, when they watch films that are considered cult classics, are not going to like them.
Yeah, I agree. I think if people have a negative reaction to this movie, reading about it, first thing, read about it, and then maybe participate in some of the things that make it a cult, right? Make it a cult. God, that's terrible.
No. I know what you mean. There's
make it something more than just a movie.
So there's a particular line in the film when I was reading about it that stood out to me as really maybe the key line, besides at the end where they say, "Don't dream it, be it," which I think is a really important take-home message. Earlier in the film, there's another key line, which is when Tim Curry is talking about Rocky, but he says, "I didn't make him for you." And the writers, I don't know if they're saying this afterward or not, but they say that line was referring to the movie itself. It's kind of a meta line saying, I didn't make this film for you, where you is like the general cisgender heterosexual audience. Like, we don't care if you don't like it. It's not for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I will, even if that might be apocryphal, I 100% would agree with that. Because I think it takes more than one viewing to get the full feeling of it.
Yeah.
Right? Because of the fact that it's got such a loose semblance of plot, it's kind of hard to keep threads together.
I also told my students that they had to use the closed captions when they watched it, because so many of the lines are either really fast or they're kind of dropped in terms of like the enunciation of the line. I said, you have to look at the closed captions because the lines matter.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The lines matter. The lyrics of the songs matter. I was even thinking about Eddie's song about love and rock and roll.
Right.
To your earlier point of like just being you and just like loving who you are and what you do. And, you know, he comes and breaks back into Frankenfurter's mansion. It's like, it's all about rock and roll, baby.
Yeah.
And he gets murdered for it. So he gets murdered in a really awkward way, but he gets murdered for it. And it's an interesting juxtaposition. Considering that Frank's MO, at least with Brad and Janet, is to awaken them.
Right.
You know? So yeah, let's take a pause here, and we will be back from a quick break. Hey, listener. Thanks for sticking around this episode. I hope you're enjoying it. Anyway, I need your help in growing this podcast's audience. In past episodes, I've asked you to share this podcast with 5 of your friends. Let's keep doing that. Share this podcast on social media, especially if you really liked an episode. Share that episode. Tell 5 of your friends or family if they have an interest in film or psychology, or even better, both. Growing the audience is our goal for the second year of programming, and so we need your help to get that done. Other ways to contribute to the podcast include tips to our PayPal, found on our website, becoming a patron at patreon.com/cinemapsychpod, rocking some sweet merch from our Spreadshirt shop, and or leaving us a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Now back to the show. So we are back with Dr. Wynn Goodfriend. We are talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show, everyone. And I wanted to continue our discussion, Wynn, about one of the criticisms that you heard from your students about, which is at the end, spoiler alert, everyone, that the people in the house where Jad and Branett go, gosh, Brad and Janet go, are actually aliens from the planet Transsexual, which is, again, not a term that is used anymore.
Right.
In the galaxy of Transylvania. And it didn't strike Brad and Janet as weird when they said the words Transylvania, because that's just a name that where vampires come from, I guess, in world. So they were like, what's Transylvania? Well, it turns out it's a galaxy somewhere else. So they made they made these creepy people aliens. And your students said what exactly?
Most of my students thought that was enforcing a negative stereotype that trans people are not even human. So they reacted against that and said, why would a movie that's supposedly celebrating LGBTQIA people make trans people aliens? Because it's making it seem like they're not even human beings. So
Right.
it seemed like it was dehumanizing them.
Yeah. And so this is the 1970s, of course. And I'm not giving a pass to some of the other criticisms that they had about, the sexual assault and things like that. That just not okay regardless, right? But this whole idea of aliens and the othering, I do agree that I think your students may have missed the point of the choice to do that from the the writing standpoint, both from the play and the screenplay. In the beginning scene, there is a wedding, and it is it's an extremely bland wedding.
Yep.
And I think Brad, it was the best man or something like that, and he's congratulating his friend, and they're like being really weird next to each other. It was like, it's like weirdly, are you guys even friends? Or is there some like sexual tension? Yeah, exactly. And Janet is pining for Brad, and they're dating, and she's just like swooning over him, and he sings a song, and he keeps tiptoeing around asking her to marry him, and she just like, come on, tell me this, do it. And you can sense frustration from Janet, right? And I'll specifically say sexual frustration. And this particular scene and then following musical number set the stage for the rest of the movie that occurs in Frankenfurter's mansion as sexually repressive. The whole thing stinks. And the interesting thing is that the preacher or the pastor or the priest, whoever, is played by Tim Curry. And they actually have him centered in frame in the back of the photograph that is taken of the entire wedding party. And I think he's spying on Brad and Janet.
I never noticed that, Alex.
You never noticed that? Okay. You got to watch it next time. And the two people with him, I believe, are some of the people that you see later. I don't know if it's necessarily Columbia, Magenta, or
Riff Raff. I think it's Riff Raff.
Riff Raff, yeah.
Who wrote all the music, by the way?
Oh, yeah?
The guy who plays Riff Raff wrote all the music.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
That makes sense.
I think that's accurate.
That makes sense. So it's this whole sexually repressive undertones that are being set as the stage, right? And so when these two sexually repressed individuals, Brad and Janet, end up making it to having their tire flat and end up going to Frankenfurter's mansion, that there's something wrong about all of these people who are acting in very strange ways, and that seems alien to them. And the screenwriters just made that real.
Right.
They just were like, oh, this is alien? Okay.
Right.
They were aliens.
So a couple of my students pointed that out, and they said, like, so I think that the alienization is both sort of metaphorical and literal, and that it's representative of the fact that mainstream culture was alienating the community, right? And so it's taking it to that satirical level. And I think that's true. I think that was the intention. But again, two of the students in my class made that connection. The rest of the students were like, why are they about aliens? So I'm just saying, like, I feel like it's a movie that you need somebody to explain to the cis hetero 19-year-olds of the world, like, this is what's really going on. Because I think without that kind of guidance, it's lost on at least many of them, at least in my experience, at least in the students in my university. Now, that maybe is not representative of all the 19-year-olds in the world.
Right. I think it does definitely depend on region, which is brings me back to my earlier point of making sure that we identify the differences and celebrate them. When I showed my students the other day the genderbread person and the gender unicorn, I was like, look, everyone's different. Yay. And I said, clap with me, please. And they did.
Yeah.
So I mean, it does. Different areas of the country do need different kinds of educational priorities for sure. And that just might be that their reactions to this movie might just be one of those areas that our region of the country needs a little bit of, and there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you're receptive to it, I think there's nothing wrong with that.
So the good news, I think, from my experience here with my students is, even if they didn't get the movie, their response was, this movie is so mean to the LGBTQIA population. Why are they stigmatizing and, enforcing negative stereotypes? So the good news is my students didn't like that they didn't like what they perceived to be transphobic or homophobic. So my students were defending the community, which was nice, right? And so even if they didn't like the movie, the reason they didn't like it was because they perceived it to be transphobic. And so that makes me happy that my students aren't transphobic.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes. I will say that even if they thought that the movie is transphobic, they should have conversations with trans people and find out whether or not it is actually transphobic. Get it directly from the horse's mouth, whether it is, because like I said, I have not heard that from this community. And while as an outsider, it may seem like it, I see the other aspects of the movie shining through, especially, like you said, the last musical number, if you don't dream it, be it, that sort of thing. Right.
And I'll say that, earlier I was saying, I'm not sure if the movie will be perceived in the same way by the next generation, right? So does it hold up? But I will emphasize the point of this movie is still absolutely essential in the modern world, because in the year 2020, there were more violent hate crimes against the trans community than in any previous year, right?
Yeah.
So while maybe it seems like a lot of the next generation is more accepting of trans people, there is a minority that is a backlash response to this, I think.
Yeah.
And that is extremely troubling and dangerous and horrible. So the importance of showing the new generation like this kind of empathy and perspective is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And it might be a case where, as the movie ages, it's going to end up being one of those things where a good chunk of the audience views it in similar ways as they do, a movie like Gone with the Wind, maybe.
Right.
I mean, there are lots of things wrong with that movie compared to Rocky Horror, but I feel like that, because films represent the artistic vision at a single point in time, it's hard to say whether or not something holds up. I personally think it holds up, at least till now. We'll see what happens in another generation, but at least till now.
In 3 years, it's going to be the 50th anniversary.
Is it? Oh my God. It's been that long.
I think there will be a resurgence of this film.
That would be nice.
It's got to be celebrated in Pride communities. 50th anniversary of Rocky Horror, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think, with the pandemic behind us in 3 years or 4 years, with the pandemic behind us,
right?
Hopefully we should be able to do that, Right.
There was going to be a big 45th anniversary, which was 2020. right?
Yeah.
So that didn't happen. But
Right.
50 is even better.
Right. I mean, you can. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Will there be a
Alex,
time after COVID?
why
We
not?
will definitely do it.
Why not is a great sum up of this entire movie.
Exactly.
Why not?
Yes. Why not? Yeah.
You don't know until you try.
Indeed. Indeed. So some fun things. Some fun things about this movie. So we can sort of end on we'll say a lighter note here. Some fun things. You had mentioned that it's a Fox property,
Right.
or at least Fox owned. Yeah, it was a 20th Century Fox film. That's right.
It was 20th Century Fox. Disney purchased 20th Century Fox in 2019.
Doesn't exist anymore.
Which makes Frank a Disney princess.
Yeah, although I think you might have some pushback on that.
Well, I don't think Disney will.
Because well, I agree with you, but here's what I'll say. You know how Angelina Jolie has played Maleficent,
of course,
to more of an anti-hero,
sure,
than she was portrayed in the original Sleeping Beauty film.
Yeah,
right. She's got a whole backstory,
sure.
And you know what her motives were against the king and all that stuff.
Yeah, you end up rooting for her.
Yeah, you're like, hell yeah, go Maleficent, although your name still means evil.
Well, sure.
So I think what I would say is to that, as far as Disney is concerned, Frankenfurter is on the same level as Maleficent. We'll give him that. I don't know if he gets to be a Disney princess, though. I'm sure that's what he wants, though, right? Because he's just a transvestite from Transylvania.
I think he would love to be a Disney princess.
From transsexual in Transylvania. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, not that I think Disney princess is really something to which anyone should aspire.
To be honest, I don't think he would aspire to it either.
I think he would say, I'd rather hang out with these other people.
Yeah, exactly. So on that musical note, what is your favorite song or musical sequence from the movie? Well, I think you may have hinted at it with Don't Dream It Be It. Of course
I love Don't Dream It Be It because of the message.
Don't dream it. Be it. Don't dream it. Be it. Don't dream it. Be it.
But it's, of course, the classic is the Time Warp.
Oh, that was going to be my answer. And I'll tell you why it's my answer. And it's not because of the song. The song doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
It's because the criminologist describes how to do it, right? With feet.
Right.
And then he's doing it on his desk and he's jumping around.
Yeah.
It's so good because he's supposed to be, stiff upper lip Brit. Talking about Brad and Janet having the harrowing time of a lifetime, right?
It's just a fun thing. Everyone wants to join in.
It's a silly little musical number that makes absolutely no sense. But I was thinking about it, knowing that they end up being aliens at the end of the movie. I'm like, I wonder if that's how they get back to
I wouldn't
Transylvania.
I wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about the physics of the plot.
No, I but this is what I do, Win. This is what I do. I test the internal consistency and internal logic of movies, and I can't stop.
So it's hard. Were you offended earlier when I said negative things about Michael Bay? Because I know that the physics of Michael Bay movies are really
No,
tight.
Michael Bay movies make me no. Michael Bay movies make me enormously anxious for all the property damage.
Yeah, well,
I can't do it. I can't handle it.
They're no Rocky Horror.
Exactly. But in any case, that's what I was thinking when I was watching it. I'm like, I wonder if the time warp is what they're saying is how they go from planet to planet. I don't know, because, it's like warp. Although, to be fair, there was only, the original series of Star Trek came out about 8 years prior to that. So, it could be a reference of that. We'll see.
I don't know.
See. I don't know either. But that is also my favorite sequence.
That's a good one.
I also like Janet, the beginning song between Brad and Janet, where everybody's just saying Janet over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's a great throwaway line in the movie where Brad is always introducing himself because he's such a stand-up guy.
Sure.
And he always introduces Janet too, and he's like, "This is my fiance, Janet Weiss." And at one time he says Janet Weiss, the German way, and she's like, "Weiss." And I was like, that is wonderful. And nothing else is done with that ever again. But it's just like, do they even know each other, or do they just want to get married so they can have sex?
Well, isn't that like a Freudian slip because he's referring to the vice of sexual attraction?
It could be. I'll have to watch the context of the scene again, but it just caught my attention, and I was like, huh. Because it also turns out that Dr. Everett turns out to be German. And they didn't know that. And so it's like, this whole thing is weird.
It's a weird movie.
Yeah, it is a strange movie. I think what you should play next for Sensation and Perception is Yellow Submarine, the animated Beatles movie.
So the way that the class works is I give them a list of 30 topics, and they vote basically on which topics we're going to cover. And I don't tell them what the accompanying movie is. So I had a bunch of topics that no one picked this semester. So we're not going to watch the movie that I would have shown. The class is in charge of the topic.
Gotcha. Because I've had similar issues with Memento, and then people being super confused by the quote unquote end of the movie.
Right. They did not enjoy Memento either, which is my favorite movie of all time.
Yes, it's up there for me as well. Top 5, I would say, for me, just because of how well put together it is. But what I'm saying is, in relation to what you were saying about Memento, and then them not liking the end of Rocky Horror, is that I showed Yellow Submarine one time, and my students were like, "Were you expecting us to be high watching this?" Because I am completely lost.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of movie that is. With all of its bright colors and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I mean, it would be a great trifecta. Just tell your students, this is what filmmaking is about.
I think they would just drop the class. I mean, I freaked them out so hard. And then I told them, like, okay, the next movie after that, I was like, this is a normal movie. Like, it's got a plot. People saw it in the theater. Like,
welcome to the Your Thoughts segment of this episode. So I asked my colleagues, our colleagues, Wind and myself, our colleagues in the Society for the Teaching of Psychology Facebook group, if they were to use Rocky Horror Picture Show in their classes, what would they want to talk about? So Scott Morgan added... how would you define normal versus abnormal, adaptive versus maladaptive behaviors, conformity versus nonconformity, and of course, what we've been talking about this episode, sexuality, sex, gender, etc. Madeline Brote imagined talking about this movie in a multicultural class, including as a subculture, how queer folks have created a community around the film, as we have mentioned a few times in this episode. Shayna Punim wrote about how she would talk about the history of transgender identity, the evolution of terms, as we have mentioned here, and juxtapose this film with the documentary Disclosure, which is on currently on Netflix, about how tropes of trans characters are either victims of violence or the violent villains themselves, which we have mentioned here. You could do, as she says, you could do all of this with just Disclosure, and you wouldn't need to show Rocky Horror, but you could do both of them. I think both of them might be good. Crystal Young mentioned queer culture as well. Alexander, great name, Bojan, shared an article written specifically about the sociology of cult films and Rocky Horror. So I will link that in the episode's show notes. And then I think a very, very great response by Miko Hishiki, talking about anticipatory responses in EEG because of Frankenfurter's mention of anticipation, that sort of thing. And then Jess Hartnett, in one of the final comments, brought a different perspective to it. The idea of midnight showings, the idea of interactive lines and dressing in costumes and connecting with larger groups, and why do we do that kind of thing, which I think is an amazing sort of out of the film context discussion that you could have with this film, and as we've mentioned. So thank you to all of you who mentioned various ways in which you could use Rocky Horror as a teaching tool and the kinds of topics that you'd like to talk about with respect to this film. So let's jump back in to the discussion with Wind Goodfriend. Well, I want to thank Dr. Wind Goodfriend for joining me to have a lively discussion on the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And we're going to do the time warp again. And Wind, before we say our final goodbyes, what is it that you would like to plug for our listeners?
Something relatively new since the last time I was able to be with you is that I've written an Audible original audiobook available only through Audible. It's called The Science of Love, and it goes through 10 lessons or lectures or chapters on theories and interesting research on the psychology of sex and love.
Nice. I am going to get my hands onto that one, considering our discussion today. So The Science of Love, available on Audible. I will link that in the description for this episode.
Thank you.
Wherever you get podcasts, I will go find it. You'll have to, free trial or have a Audible subscription to do that. But I will link that. And so... And I think that everyone should check that out. I'm definitely going to get my hands on that too.
Thank you.
And so thank you again, Wynn, for joining me. It's always a pleasure talking movies with you.
I love being here. I hope you have me back.
I definitely. And for everyone else, until the next episode, thank you for listening.